the West Sacramento Planning Commission. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Dr. Kelchi, would you please lead us tonight? Tonight's agenda is available on the counter along with the white request to speak cards, and it should be completed and turned into the clerk on your left, on my right here, prior to the completion of any staff presentation. For those speakers who would like to speak on items not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of this commission, please write item A, as I have one request to speak here. That's item A. And if you have a specific item, if you can, well, there's only one item, so just write that agenda item. All speakers will be limited to 3 minutes, and you can track your time by monitoring the clock to my right. Speaking in public may cause some individuals to feel uncomfortable, so everyone is asked to be professional and respectful to all speakers. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and televised, so all speakers, in order to be recognized, must be called on by the chair and come forward to the microphone, and please state your name for the record. Today we have one presentation item for tonight's meeting. At this time, we will take up the presentation by the public on matters not on the agenda. And just a reminder to my fellow commissioners that we are prohibited by law from discussing issues not on the agenda but brought to us at this time. And Ann Garrity, if you can please come up.
Good evening. My name is Ann Garrity, and I'm with Renaissance Village Homes Co-Housing. This is a new project that is beginning in the Washington neighborhood of West Sacramento. Co-housing is basically owner-developed housing in which people come together to create a community which includes private, completely independent units, along with quite a bit of community space. And we expect this space will include a community kitchen and dining room, as well as other kinds of room, guest rooms, maybe a workshop, very likely bicycle storage. It will be organized by the members. We expect the site that we have an option on is at the corner of 4th and G Street. It's a very wonderful site of 0.59 acres, and we understand that under the R4 zoning, it can hold 28 units. So we're looking at 25 to 28 units. We're looking for members now. We're hoping to have 10 to 15 members by the end of the year so that we can begin the architectural design work at the beginning of the year. And I know that we will be seeing more of you. We're very excited to be in West Sacramento and excited about all the things that are happening here. I listened to the mayor's State of the City speech that was in May, and I thought I knew about many of the things that were going on, but I was surprised about how many things that I didn't know. And I'm hoping that our project will be on the agenda for next year's State of the City meeting, and that we will be well underway in the planning of that project. We have 5 members, and we would invite all of you to participate in any way you would like. If you would like to be on our newsletter list or just get our first or second newsletter, send me an email. Thank you.
Thank you. You can provide your contact information to our secretary, Mr. Tilley, and he can pass that information along to us.
Very good.
Thank you very much for your presentation tonight.
Thank you.
Okay. We will now move to correspondence and staff communications from Planning Commission Secretary, Mr. Tilley.
Yes, thank you very much. One important item to note for you tonight, there is a memo for myself in front of you tonight, but I do want to announce that as of yesterday, the draft EIR for General Plan 2035 was on the street. for a 45-day comment period. This is a major milestone in the long saga of trying to complete our general plan update. And so I wanted to alert the public as well as to the commission to that fact, and to also, speaking specifically for the commission, that I will be bringing a workshop to you at our next meeting on the EIR with its summary of its findings and conclusions. And so in the interim, that document is available on our website, or I can provide you a copy via another format. We don't have a lot of hard copies right now. They're about $100 and something a piece to print. But if anyone truly needs a hard copy or wants one on a CD, I can provide that to you. And then I wanted to give this a little bit more notice than our typical packet for a document that's fairly lengthy. And so we will be bringing that forward at our next meeting, and I'll also be presenting it to the council at their next meeting as well. This time, that concludes staff correspondence.
Are there any questions? Commissioner Tumber.
Is there any way you can send us an email with this link?
Yes, I'll do that. I'll do that tomorrow, and that way you'll have it live, but it is on our website.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And for your website, for members of the public that are watching, where can they find it, if you can give a little instruction?
If they go on the city's website and go to the community development page, they'll be able to access it there. And I know our communication staff is working on putting a button right on the home page that will take you right to it.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? No? All right. All right, we'll move to disclosure of ex parte communications. Any disclosure? I think it would be, okay. Next is consideration and approval of the minutes from the July 21st meeting. I'll accept a motion to approve the minutes. Commissioner Sternfeld moves.
Second.
Commissioner Tumber seconds. All in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Any noes? Any abstentions? Any abstentions? One abstention. Commissioner Lepore. Okay, very good, thank you. This is moved, and next item is on our regular agenda is update on the Pioneer Bluff Reuse Master Plan.
Yes, Chair Guerrero, I'd like to introduce or reintroduce Katie Yancey with the city's Economic Development and Housing Department. She has been shepherding this effort for some time now, and she'll be doing the presentation tonight, and then both of us will be available to answer questions tonight, with Katie being our primary, and then anything else I can help with, particularly general plan wise, I'll be happy to help as well. So,
Mr. Tilley, thank you for that introduction. I should also note that he asked that I make this presentation substantial, since I'm the only item on your agenda. So if at any time you would like to interrupt to ask a question, I'm perfectly comfortable taking that approach, since I do have quite a lot of material to cover with you, and I don't want you to feel like I'm going to get too far away from the question at hand. So please feel free, if it's necessary, to interrupt. Thank you so much for this opportunity. So this would be my fourth opportunity meeting with one of our advisory commissions. Since May, I've been taking the opportunity to visit with a variety of our commissions, including the Transportation, Mobility, Infrastructure Commission, the Economic Development and Housing Commission, and then we recently just had a joint meeting of our two Parks Departments commissions, as well as an open house. And so I look forward to updating you on what are some of the topics and some of the recommendations that came from that from those discussions. To refresh this group, in 2014, the city was asked to prepare a Pioneer Bluff transition plan. It was part of the council's strategic plan for the year. And at the end of the year, the council did adopt accepted a plan that basically described the objective of looking at transition planning. As you may recall, the general plan did include some elements in some components in the land use element that talked about deindustrializing this site and perhaps providing limitations on the amount of new industrial work or improvements or maintenance work that was being done on this existing industrial enclave. This took that idea in the general plan one step further and looked at the transition processes, the scope, and the costs of getting to what the general plan had envisioned. It was a summary level document, and it really sought to answer, is this transition economically viable, and what would be the general path for achieving this transition? It really looked to say, how do you get to finished parcels that can support the development community in achieving the vision? And it really identified two critical issues, which was maximizing the amount of buildable land and putting together a comprehensive and integrated access and circulation plan that supported the urban waterfront vision. The most substantial thing that came out of this 2014 effort was an action plan, and that outlined a strategic approach for coordinating with ongoing city and regional planning activities that would influence these two issues, the amount of buildable land and how access and circulation would be solved. And it focused on things like flood, streetcar, and then where the river crossing, such as the Broadway Bridge, would end up. In addition, it contained a limited number of loose policies and principles that went beyond what the general plan has envisioned, that sort of interpreted the general plan, that should govern this reuse master plan exercise that I'm in the middle of undertaking. The goal is to adopt a 2018 a Pioneer Bluff reuse master plan. That would include a more comprehensive baseline of existing information, a lot of stakeholder outreach, which we received some direction from the council on who our stakeholders are and what that outreach might look like, including the formation of a TAC in October. And then our goal is to further articulate the general plan's 2035 updates vision, to take it to the next level and really sort of nail down some of the specific details about where and how development will occur under the guise of riverfront mixed use and MUNC, which is mixed use neighborhood commercial. And the result of this will be a land use circulation and financing plan that we intend to bring forward as a plan development overlay and tier off of the general plan's EIR for CEQA clearance. These are the existing economic conditions. This was included in your staff report, and as you can see, the assessed value is fairly nominal. We're receiving very little sales tax is being generated off of this industrial enclave. A majority of that reason is because we're a primary property owner, so we're not collecting any property tax off of our property. And then the tank farms and the fueling stations, we don't collect sales tax off of those transactions. So this has very limited fiscal impact in terms of transitioning this property. We decided to expand the transition processes that were discussed in the Pioneer Bluff transition plan. It really just talked about what deindustrialization looks like and then how do you get to backbone infrastructure, because the purpose of that plan was, again, to just determine, is this economically viable? But in terms of talking to our stakeholders, they said we need more than, yes, it works. We need the process of how do we get to clean and scraped land? How do we discuss with the city, how do we do our business relocation? And then ultimately, what kind of development is the city council looking for? What would our DAs look like? What are the financial obligations that you're expecting us to be placing on our property? Do you envision a CFD, or are we participating in an EIFD? And so we're attempting to expand that discussion in response to our stakeholders. And so therefore, we're proposing to adopt or bring in the Pioneer Bluff transition plan into this reuse master planning and to amend the document. And so the Pioneer Bluff transition plan, as it is, would serve as volume 1, and these series of amendments that we'll be bringing forward through the end of the year would serve as volume 2, and then we would be adding additional volumes to get to that 2018 timeframe. We're also discussing more detailed transition timelines and bringing in a discussion about the city's roles. Those were all missing from the original Pioneer Bluff transition plan. We're attempting to discuss what this means in a post-redevelopment world, what tools are available to us with after the loss of redevelopment. How do we encourage environmental remediation now that we don't have similar laws like Polanco? There's new laws that are out called Gatto, and so we're attempting to understand what are these tools that are available to the city. And then when we're wearing our different hats, traditionally the redevelopment agency, which was a separate legal entity from the city, had a source of revenue that it could go out and do business relocation or do environmental remediation. It was a separate legal entity, so it freed up the city to wear its regulator hat fairly purely. Now that the city's going to be kicking on some of those roles, we're having to sort of discuss, and we intend to discuss in our amendment, what it really means for the city to wear each of these different hats, and where do they blend, and where do they overlap, and where are we looking to seek separation between them. We've reconstituted several of the responsibilities that the agency had, but we're still lacking in a lot of the tools. And so as we go through this process, we'll also be coming back to the various commissions and describing what tools are becoming available. There's several bills that are currently in the legislature that would provide us additional tools. And so once we understand what those tools are and how we'll deploy them, we'll be updating this. So the main thing to take away is that even though this is an amendment, there'll probably be another amendment that'll be coming down as our understanding of what our responsibilities and tools and our timelines will be revised in accordance to that. In your staff report, we talked about amendments specifically to the deindustrialization strategy. This is where there's the existing uses that were identified in 2014 in Pioneer Bluff, where talked about transitioning from an active industrial enclave into urban waterfront. It discussed the possibility of achieving a 5 to 7 year time frame starting in 2014 for business relocation. It did not discuss what the time frame for heavy industry relocation would be, and so we've attempted to fill in that gap and say it's 2025, and we're putting together an action plan that would respond to that time frame. What's important to note here is that even though we're separating deindustrialization from land development, from building development, as I said, there's three transition processes, they're really interlinked. We're just trying to create an environment where we can be opportunistic with our deindustrialization activities, because the remaining processes are fairly linear. You know, building a road so someone can build a home, or building a water tank so someone can put in an apartment complex, that process is fairly understood. Those dependencies are fairly understood. But this is a unique planning document where we're actually saying, how do we get these undesirable uses out, and how do we create an opportunistic and responsive environment for a developer coming in and saying, I don't no longer want to do this use that I'm doing now. I want to transition over. How quickly can I do that, and what incentives could the city offer that are available to that? To that end, the city's trying to take itself and give its best example, and so it's in the process of relocating its own courtyard. In May, the council approved a contract for that preliminary design, and staff anticipates that it will see that first initial design work in the next couple of weeks, and we're shooting for a 2019 timeframe for relocating the courtyard. So we're trying to set an example of how you can get out of these industrial uses and look at transitioning some of these properties. The deindustrialization strategy is new for Stone Lock. Stone Lock was not included in the original boundary of the Pioneer Bluff Transition Plan. And in August, the council directed us to include Stone Lock in our analysis. And so we're incorporating Stone Lock into our reuse master planning. There's not a lot of deindustrialization that has to happen in Stone Lock, but what's there is significant. Even though it's vacant and it's publicly owned, it has some serious topography issues attached to it. The Chevron pipeline, as you can see, I apologize for the quality of this graphic, but it's an old document that I had to pull this from, runs through the middle of the Stone Lock property, and it connects not to tank farms on our side of the river, but tank farms on the city of Sacramento's. So we have a lot of interjurisdictional relationships that we have to work through. And then as part of the loss of the redevelopment agency, the city took ownership and control of the Stone Lock facility, where we held a public open house on June 18th to get some interest from the public on how we should reuse this facility. And it is a critical component of the city's flood protection system. And so we're trying to figure out, how does this fit into the work that West Safka is doing? How are we maximizing the utility of this really unique piece of infrastructure? And so the deindustrialization strategy for Stone Lock is as complicated as Pioneer Bluff's, very different, and it does in fact affect the developability of the property. So we have a few new deindustrialization products that we're adding to the many list of things that were included in the original Pioneer Bluff transition plan, which included things like courtyard relocation and tank farm relocation and rail relocation, all very large projects on their own. We're adding a public access to Stone Lock, so a safety and public access plan for the Stone Lock facility, so that we can make sure that we are alleviating some of the nuisance issues that are attached to this property. And so we went to the two parks commissions and had a joint meeting and made a recommendation that we invest some funds in developing a public access and safety plan for this facility. Our other new deindustrialization project is centered around the bulkhead structure, which is a component of the Stone Lock facility, as you see here. It does not meet current urban levy design criteria, and it would be about a $2.5 million retrofit. This retrofit has some challenges attached to it as well. Essentially, we'd be creating a wall between these two water bodies, and there's been a lot of concern already about water quality and fish and wildlife. This also makes it more challenging to plan for future recreation. So we consider this an interim condition, and we're trying to solve for the immediate sort of public safety issue that's attached here. We also asked the commissions we also provided a recommendation to the commissions and asked if they were interested in having us do some additional investigation that would look at alternatives to this retrofit that would allow for and support further recreation opportunities, and they encouraged us to do that as well. And then our other new deindustrialization project is really, it's just an expansion and a refinement of the one that was included in the Pioneer Bluff Transition Plan. We have a better understanding of what it means to do rail relocation and rail removal. And included in the general plan land use element is a new land use policy 5.22, which talks about rail relocation and rail removal. Suggests that the city will pursue relocation and removal of freight lines to facilitate planned mixed-use development. As you can see, the area that's in sort of that brick color, that's Pioneer Bluff, and it is extremely constrained by this railroad. And so we have already appropriated some money for a technical merit study to look at relocating what you see there onto the diagram that's on your left, track 10, relocating it over where you see the green that shows 12 and 11. So the council's made an appropriation for that. We anticipate going to the Port Commission in September and asking for a similar appropriation so we can begin this technical merit study to determine, is it even possible for us to relocate this rail? Our objective is to pull it out of the larger regional rail project and see if there's a way to fast track this in order to assist the redevelopment and the reuse of Pioneer Bluff. So those are the three new deindustrialization projects that we're taking on as part of this amendment. And what this really culminates in is a comprehensive discussion of the deindustrialization status of all of these properties. And this really fits into a discussion about the dependencies. And as I said earlier, we're trying to be as nimble as possible about how we're going to achieve deindustrialization. We're trying to be flexible. And so we're using this as sort of our baseline of where things are and trying to determine what's ripe, what's ready for us to take action. And so this amendment will include an additional discussion about what are the redevelopment opportunities that are here, and how we might, in those various different roles that I discussed earlier, influence taking these deindustrialization statuses to something that's more like clean and scraped and ready for reuse. We're also adding in a substantial amendment to talk about the land development strategy. The Pioneer Bluff transition plan really only talked about backbone infrastructure. There's a larger piece related to land development, and the first one is sort of when we're a property owner. What does it mean to be a property owner when you're a public agency? And we're testing that out with a recommendation that came from our Port Commission. They're proposing that we remove a portion of the Stonelock property from the reuse master planning and to bring it out to the public. And so an RFP was issued on June 15th for the property that you see here. And the Port Commission is scheduled for a closed session on August 17th to evaluate the responses that we received during this process. Excuse me. We anticipate that we would be able to move into a discussion with the developer, and if those negotiations are successful, we believe we'll be able to gather really relevant market information that would influence the planning for the rest of Stonelock. And the big issue that's at hand is how urban should we be planning Stonelock to be? How should we be sizing our infrastructure in anticipation of how urban we expect Stonelock to be? And so we hope to use this opportunity to gain some market intel that would give us some guidance on what to do there. Another role.
Could I stop you
Of
right
course.
at that point? You know, and I understand we're trying to put some residential down there. And I would like to just remind you that we took some of that residential and moved it down to Southport. And so we have a very limited number of residences that are supposed to be going in there. And I recall Charlene telling us that she had limited the number to go to that area. So I think you should talk to her a little bit, because we took some of that residential and we moved it down into the Southport area. And that was how we justified putting extra residents in Southport down at the southern end. So, and it's just a comment that you need to double check because we limited that at that point. So, just a reminder.
May I, Mr. Tilley, could you respond? Is that reflected in the general plan update that you are bringing forward?
Well, that was likely during the River Park and Yarborough days where, you know, there was a lot of numbers floating around and underbuilt and overbuilt. And so all those went into the mix, but all that's really being, you know, recalced now through the general plan, you know, going forward as we adjust some of our density ranges as we go forward. So we are mindful of what happened, you know, then and what some of the discussion was, but then a lot of that is back on the table as part of the overall general plan update going forward.
And David, I'm fine with that. I just wanted to remind you that that's part of what we discussed in those projects. We took extra we put extra homes down in the southern area, and then Charlene said, but we've limited the actual number that can go in Pioneer Bluffs, and we're gonna hold to that number. So if we're gonna make adjustments, we just, when we do the general plan, and everybody would love to hear this come out, you know, we can talk about all these things again, but we probably will. But it was just a reminder, that's what we talked about back then.
I recall.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, so there's various roles that the city can play. One of the additional roles that the city can play is the infrastructure service provider. It could be the master developer of infrastructure. And so we looked at that in Pioneer Bluff, and we're revisiting these costs. So in 2014, we assumed that it was about $325 million of investment that needed to be made for backbone infrastructure. Most of this was related to access and circulation, about $225 million. These numbers have since gone up. And how much they're going to go up is going to depend on several things, including like where the flood setback is. And we've been having some discussions about how to minimize the cost that's associated with that. What role Pioneer Bluff plays in paying for the rail relocation, if that is a viable option. And these numbers do not substantially include that cost. Only about $35 million was identified in this total number for rail relocation. It would be substantially more if Pioneer Bluff was participating at a greater rate. And these numbers don't include the backbone infrastructure needs for Stone Lock as well too. So we're working through those numbers, and part of the reason why we don't have those numbers today is that, as Commissioner Moore pointed out, we're still trying to figure out what the correct land use is and bringing into consideration previous direction and what the general plan says. We're trying to find that sweet spot to right-size our infrastructure. So we intend on coming back with some more information. We did present a recommendation for proceeding to the full extent with the levy setback analysis, which is about a 2-year process, since this is also a critical component of determining where a trail system could occur. The city also plays the role of the land use regulator, and that's primarily what I'd like to discuss with this body this evening. So in terms of circulation, we have 3 components of our visioning exercise, which is required by the grant that is funding this reuse master plan. We received a Sustainable Communities Strategy grant for about $400,000, and so our grant work program has 3 portions to it: an existing conditions assessment, a visioning exercise, and then the land use financing plan. Primarily, as we get ready to move into the visioning exercise, we want to discuss with this commission what it means to be the land use regulator during that process. So first, we have to develop a circulation plan, a local circulation plan that ties into regional improvements, such as a future Broadway bridge or other river crossing, the improvements that need to be made to Jefferson, improvements to the off-ramps and on-ramps associated with Highway 50. So there's a large range of issues that affect where traffic is going to go, what's a desirable route, and how does this relate to land use. And so we're also taking into consideration what the general plan policies are related to that, and then the new direction that we receive from SB 375 and SB 743 as they relate to looking at VMT reduction measures and integrating some of these TOD, transit-oriented development components, into our analysis that we're doing. In October, we presented with the Broadway Bridge a workshop and discussed with council the results of that traffic analysis that was conducted. And it shows that there's a substantial amount of traffic that will be coming up Jefferson. and up South River Road. As Southport continues to build out, when there's a new bridge, there's a strong desire to use that bridge to get to the central city. And so we asked the council, how do you want us to manage that in relationship to the land use? And they told us, do your best to engineer for TOD and take into consideration the needs of our citywide circulation. And so we're trying to figure out how to incorporate the council's direction as the land use regulator when we're talking about circulation. We're also the land use regulator when we're talking about land use. And so the general plan update is proposing that Pioneer Bluff be zoned as, or designated as riverfront mixed use. Riverfront mixed use under the general plan is characterized as generally regionally oriented urban land development that's mixed use. That means residential, office, retail, parks, entertainment facilities. Buildings are typically, under this scenario, 3 or more stories, and our density range is 40 to 120 dwelling units to the acre. Stone Lock would be designated a new designation. It would remove that patchwork of zoning that exists on it now. It would be under a new mixed-use designation, mixed-use neighborhood commercial, MUNC. And that's primarily oriented towards local uses more than regional uses, and the building development there will serve the residents with their daily service and retail needs. And building heights there don't typically exceed 4 stories. And that's generally what we're working with in terms of the general plan and the target densities that are coming from the general plan. And the last role that we can play in terms of the land use regulator as it relates to the work program and the grant is how we're programming parks and open space. The documents that you see in front of you are some older advisory documents that the council has seen before, and I'm sure this commission is familiar with, which is the 2003 Parks Master Plan, as well as the 2003 Riverfront Master Plan. The Parks Master Plan is an advisory document, and it guides the development operation of the city's parks and open space systems. And it's really an interpretation of the policies that are in the general plan, and we're attempting to interpret what the direction came from this image, which is quite substantially very green, yet we have a general plan that's telling us there's development. Additionally, we're also looking at what the open space component of the Riverfront Master Plan said. It looked for a large park, and it looked to sort of create this mirror of what you see at Miller Park so that we had a similar facility on our side of the river. And so we've been attempting to interpret these items. We brought forward this diagram to the Parks Commissions, and this is what we propose as our interpretation of those documents. Additionally, we proposed that we incorporate some of the urban park standards that were developed in the Bridge District for Pioneer Bluff exclusively, which primarily means that instead of having parks, you would have distributed park elements throughout the facility, as the land in these urban areas is extremely precious. And so we were looking to take advantage of these small pocket parks that would come up to provide sort of a nice place to go play some chess, or maybe a bocce ball court, a place to have a latte and think. So that's how we proposed to the Parks Commissions, and they were supportive of that idea. So in terms of getting to Commissioner Moore's questions, this is what we believe, based on the work that was done in the general plan, based on the work that was done recently with the YOLO rail relocation study that we participated in, and staff's interpretation of those documents, what we're looking at in terms of full build out for Pioneer Bluff and Stone Lock, and the annual assessed value based on the general plan horizon and then the full built out condition. So what this essentially is telling you is that about half of Pioneer Bluff and Stone Lock will build out in the general plan time frame, and then the remaining half will build out after that time frame. And this is our preliminary numbers that we're using to start assessing if we can pay for the backbone infrastructure, if this is still continues to be an economically feasible attempt on part of the city, and also what we're planning on developing for the enhanced infrastructure financing district that's coming along. Next steps, we'll be bringing workshops to the council in August and September, seeking approval of these amendments in October, and then with the help of my esteemed Parks colleagues, we'll be starting the Parks and Open Space Visioning exercise in the fall. I very much appreciate your attention. I know it's a lot of information, and I'm eager to receive any guidance or answer any questions. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Yancey, and take it back to the commissioners if there are any questions. I don't have any requests to speak at this time, but I'll open it up to the public. But if there are any questions to my right? Comments, feedback, input before it goes to the council. so that we can provide some feedback. And there have been other commissions that have provided some feedback as well, which was included in our report, and very helpful. I definitely agree with some of those recommendations, too. Charlie?
Well, Kitty, I'll tell you what, this is one exciting plan. You know, we're only lacking one thing I can see, is that's money. Yeah, it's a technical thing. You know, to me, where the tank farms and that area is, that's gonna develop hopefully as people can see a way through to buy the property. I think all the landowners are aware. We just have to find somebody besides the city to buy their land. And that'll develop on its own course. Is that kind of the plan you have for that?
I think the strategy that we've been discussing internally is that the city, in its various different roles, has the ability to inform the business decisions that the tank farms are making.
Right.
When you talk about, for example, the Mike McGowan Bridge, you go from a cul-de-sac where the only reason why I'm down on South River Road when there was a cul-de-sac was because I was working down there, or I was
Right.
a truck picking up a thing, or I was lost. That was the only reason why you were down there. And I think when you talk about the city electing to invest in infrastructure, so it's that infrastructure service provider, it puts in the Mike McGowan Bridge, and it suddenly opens up that space to the public, and they now see it as a way to get to the northern part of the city, or get to the city of Sacramento. That's one way that we inform those business decisions, is we say, look, you've got company now. Is this really where you want to be?
I agree, but I mean, in the same token, I personally hope that we can keep all the businesses that are down there currently in our town, but we don't have the luxury of redevelopment to help relocate them. So I don't quite know how you're gonna do that, but I mean, I think it's important to keep Clark Pacific there, and Clark Trucking, and Ramus Oil, and keep them in our town.
The business retention is something that we discussed heavily at the Economic Development and Housing Commission. So we came to them and said, please give us some guidance. How far do you think we should push on in terms of business retention? One of the commissioners was alluding to the same issues that you're alluding to right now, which is that they're very important. They're something that we hold esteem for having in our city. How do we make sure that we have them? I think the answer that I gave them, I'll share with you, which is that some of these businesses were thinking about transitioning before we started talking to them. Some of them were thinking that it was time to go before the transition plan came in effect. And I would argue that the land use policy A10 really gave them that push that they needed to start thinking about. And so, for example, Clark Pacific bought property in Woodland.
That's correct.
And that happened before the transition plan came around. And so I think there are certain businesses that were already seeing the lay of the land and already feeling the pressures of the land use policy A10 and saying it's time to exit. And so before we even knew enough to have business retention discussions with them, they had already made their plans to perhaps leave the city. Our philosophy has changed since then. We are more self-aware. And so when we have these discussions with these property owners, and they're members of our TAC, our Technical Advisory Committee, they're looking to us and saying, what can you do? With the loss of redevelopment, we're limited, and so we're trying to be as creative as possible.
Right, and I encourage you to do that, and I don't have an answer for you, because I'm not smart enough to figure this out, how we're gonna make it work. But it just seems like we have a huge investment we have to make, and we're banking on a lot of things, you know, the Broadway Bridge to be part of it. You know, I think that may come, maybe not in my lifetime, but it's coming.
May not
You
come in
know?
my career.
And, you know, I mean, I look at your transition numbers and I'm going, that's very optimistic. And I will use the same analogy that Mr. Tilley and I have talked about before. We built the Rivercat Stadium and assumed everybody would start building around it, and we're still waiting for somebody to take a building permit out. And then we did the Pyramid building and thought, golly gee whiz, everybody's gonna come to that area, and we did get Cal Stirs. So there has been a little movement, but not nearly as quickly and as fast as I thought that it would go. And it really disappoints me, because I thought we could move a lot quicker. So if that being the case, I'm not sure that some of your numbers are even realistic. I don't know how fast some of these are gonna move. I don't know how fast Clark Pacific will move as soon as you find somebody to buy his land. You know, he could go to Woodland. I mean, that would be a fairly easy transition. But, you know, I don't know about the others, how long it's gonna take to get all the tank farms out of there and move on. There's always talk, and we know that there's possibilities, but for it to actually happen sometimes is difficult. And, you know, I'm as optimistic as anybody. I'd sure like to see some of this. I think all the ideas are great. It's just hard to put them, to make them all work. I just don't know how you plan to make them all work. And I don't know where we're gonna find the money to do all of it. And I think that would be, you know, as we get into it, just a touch. And remember, the Planning Commission has no say on the money. This is strictly the council decision. But as curiosity, I'd be curious when you come back one time to say, and here's how we think we're gonna fund all this. Because that seems like a big issue to me and a big issue to our community, just to take over a couple little pieces of land that we're gonna spend $400 million, and I don't know where we're gonna get it. So, you know, but do I think it's all great? And I think the work has to be tremendous. I mean, that you put into this, I think it's great. But it'll be interesting when we get a little further along to see how it's all going to happen. But guys like Andrew work for the state, so he'll help you. Okay? Thank you. I think it was great. Great presentation.
Thank you. May I respond to some of your questions that you had in your
I didn't know I had a question.
Oh.
I was just kind of making comments, so I don't know that I have a question.
no
But if
problem.
you do, you're fine if you'd like to comment on
Yeah,
some of it.
Just one note here. I think Commissioner Moore, I think what you're touching on, Inmo, makes a lot of sense. And that, you know, when you look at that area out there, particularly Pioneer Bluff, there's a lot of obstacles over there to its ultimate vision. And so I think why we're doing in this effort in this manner is reflective of that, and why we didn't go straight to doing a specific plan, for example, because, you know, we're not quite there yet for something like that. But you know, I'm certainly hoping that this effort will continue to point us in that direction, and that when it's a little more right, maybe we would do some more formal, you know, planning with all the, you know, the charrettes and the pretty boards and all that stuff. But this is really the step we're at right now, which is sort of one step beyond just having the basic general plan stuff.
You know, David, and I really appreciate that. And I was just going to make the comment, though, that, you know, as we talk about we're going to build the bridge, well, yeah, but we think we can get funding from the federal government, the state government, and that'll all come together, and that will help us get this. But when we start talking about other things, you know, they become a little harder to visualize how we're going to be able to pay for some of that stuff. And so, and I was just making it as a comment. It doesn't have to be specific, but it was just, how the heck are we going to do this? I mean, Katie's got a pencil and paper, and she just writes all this stuff down and goes, I think this would be great. And I agree with her. I just don't know how we're going to pay for it. So I was kind of curious as we talk a little bit, and you kind of go, and I think we can get some help from these people, or these are where the developers start helping us and stuff like that. So it wasn't a specific question. It was an overall comment that I think it's a grand idea, and golly gee whiz, my checkbook's not that big, so I'm going to have to defer to someone else for a little help. So I think your ideas are great and fine, and I just would kind of, as we get a little further, maybe say, and I've got ideas of how we can do some of this. And I'm sure you do.
Yeah, then that's actually the question I thought you were asking me, was how I might pay for it. I was going to give you a brief sort of response on how we might do that, and what your role is in that. In fact, you do have a role in how we would pay for it. Enhanced infrastructure financing districts are this idea that you create a baseline and that you set aside funding based on the property tax differential that's generated by improvements that you make or investment that's made by the private sector, the public sector, and that shows up in the assessor's tax roll, and then that becomes a bondable funding stream. Now, you don't determine if that's ready, you don't form the EIFD, that's not your role, but your role is critical in helping us make sure that we get the number right for what are we expecting our development to be and when. And that's why your comment earlier about, is this the right, what's the right number of residential units that belong here? That feeds into the EIFD. And so the Planning Commission and all of our other commissions who give us advice on how we should be looking at the development envelope and what's the right sequence to get to the development envelope, and how should we be focusing our attention on those dependencies that are necessary to take care of, like rail relocation or the bridge to get to that development. Those all affect timing, and we want to program our EIFD so that when we need that money, we've actually collected that money, and that's how we'll pay for it, is that it'll be a self-sustaining, pay-as-you-go infrastructure program that we try to right time it. So we've done enough development that money's coming in, that we can bond against it, and that we can use those bonds proceeds to pay for the next round of infrastructure that gets us the next phase of development, and so on, and so on, and so on. And the role that I see the Planning Commission playing in is making sure that we are being aggressive but realistic, that we are looking at all the angles in terms of picking these numbers. And so while you saw a grand number, right, you know, the 1.8 billion, the $900 million, there's a lot of math that goes behind that. And as we keep coming back to this commission, we're going to be talking about what are the right neighborhoods. We're going to divide these districts into smaller neighborhoods. We're going to talk about the dependencies. What makes these neighborhoods ready to go? Do you agree that we've captured all those dependencies, and have we timed those right? Because that feeds into that EIFD discussion, which is really how we're going to pay for all of this. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
No, I think I have the general idea. I just thought that as it got so far along, we probably need to talk just a touch about it as you proceed through it.
Sure.
And then, of course, we'll talk about it at the general plan, and I'm sure we'll talk about a whole bunch of things over the next few months. I'm done.
Oh, are you?
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
good.
I'm sorry.
All right, Dr. Kelter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Katie, thank you very much. This is very exciting. And I want to specifically thank you and thank the planners for what looks like a very flexible way of thinking about how this development is going to proceed. I'm kind of familiar with the problems that the rail yards development across the river seems to be encountering with regard to making sure that the residential development and the commercial development are not separated by decades, but rather separated perhaps by months or a few years, so that we don't get into a situation where all the commercial is developed and the residential never gets developed because of what some folks' prejudices are about what pays and what doesn't pay. I think the thing they're overlooking is how important it is for people to live in a place to make it vibrant and successful. And I'm seeing a lot of that in what you described, and I'm very pleased by that. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Any other feedback from commissioners? Commissioner Lepore? No? Commissioner Tumber?
Thank you for the presentation. It was very informative, and it looks like an exciting project, but I don't think that I understand this to the depth where I can provide you with feedback. But it was an excellent presentation. I am excited.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Sternfels.
Ms. Yancey, could you provide a little more context on particularly the tank farm component and the regional approach that probably will have to be taken in order to make that movement a reality?
Yes, I will attempt to answer your question without divulging some of this information, which is not ready for public. I mean, part of the strategies that we've developed are, they're not something that we want to necessarily sort of be broadcasting, right? I mean, there's limited capacity for us to be in, limited resources really for us to be engaging in tank farm relocation. And we don't have a partnership yet with the city of Sacramento to do this work. And so at this point, we would really like to see that partnership be formalized. When the Broadway Bridge feasibility study was conducted, EPS prepared a memo that talked about real estate potential, and it identified that the tank farms need to be relocated. They are a deterrent for that bridge to occur. not only for our jurisdiction, but for that jurisdiction as well, and that it recommended that we work together. We've yet to make any progress on that partnership. So we'd like to sort of have done that before we start talking about what the real plan is. The only plan that really exists right now is this Wickland study that was done that talked about relocating the tank farms to the port. And that there's a piece of property that's on the port that could handle tank farm relocation. But it doesn't have a discussion about why the tank farms would want to do that, how you would incentivize the tank farms from going there, what kind of political will it would take to get the tank farms to go there. It literally just checked the box, can they go here? All that other stuff is certainly messier. And I wish that I had an answer for you today that said, and this is the path for going forward. It is unknown, but it is not without hope. It is not without a path moving forward. It's just that the path is still murky, and the roles and responsibilities that our jurisdiction in the city of Sacramento play still yet to be negotiated. And so you understand how challenging it is for me to answer your question, because until those things have happened, we don't want to be saying, well, this is our position, or this is the way that we would do that, or this is what our expectations would be, because, you know, no one wants to negotiate something like that when they all know all your secrets. It's the worst way to play poker, right? Is that here's my cards. So that's the situation that we're in, is that a little bit of this is a gigantic poker, you know, game. And so we're working on it, and we are excited about the prospects that we have over the next couple of years to actually come back with a legitimate answer to that question about this is our plan moving forward once we've gone through those negotiations. I'm sorry that I can't.
No, that's fair. I mean, I think I just wanted to confirm my inclination that this is a regional problem, a regional challenge that has to be addressed,
Yeah.
because these farms on both sides of the river service the entire region's gasoline consumption. And so recognizing the potential impacts to the entire region, and also recognizing that a solution will probably have to be regional.
Yes.
I just think that's a helpful point for us all to think about in the timing and scope of this transition.
Yeah, and it'll have to be strategic on the city's part, because as much as we desire it, we wouldn't want to be overextending the city in terms of committing to something. I think Commissioner Moore put it best, as you don't want to spend all of our money just eliminating one use, and then we're left for years with nothing else to do, hoping that that investment pays off.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Any other comments or feedback? No? Katie, thank you so much for the presentation. It was really, really informative. A lot of information, as you described, over quite a few years. And thinking about the slide from 2003, trying to read into what exactly happened. One of my concerns is, as we move forward, we don't provide enough information. It's a long-term plan, and trying to provide as much detail, transparency, understanding as to where we are today, what our thinking is, documenting all of that, and also taking into consideration that, you know, back then when we were, you know, thinking about the moving of the businesses, that redevelopment was accessible at the time, and we had other plans for redevelopment, and, you know, city leadership, you know, showed, you know, what their interest was in the investment of that. Now we don't have it. Now we can say, you know, that is our reason why. But in reality, I think cities, investors, interested people can pull together and come with some solutions to keep our businesses that are here, you know, in place. I think that they've provided a resource for our community, and I'd like to continue to see them as a resource for our community, and see what we can do. I think city leadership is extremely important for that as we work across the aisle or across the river,
Yeah.
over to Sacramento. You know, we have new leadership coming into play, and I myself as staff sometimes know that, you know, sometimes at a staff level things can't always happen, but it does take the leadership to make these things happen. I think we have some good potential and opportunities that will, you know, help maybe reduce those costs, and then invest in other areas where I think we can strategically place our you know, financing and money in. And taking a look at, you know, the expansion of, you know, more housing, and what it is we're going to, you know, consider doing in our general plan. Some of the things that come to mind are, you know, as we're looking at more housing, our infrastructure. making sure that we have everything in place, you know, seeing that our schools are impacted already, and, you know, having more families means, you know, expanding and providing that resource and taking that into consideration. I like to see the parks, and I like to see the open space. That's really nice, that's important. I think families really appreciate that. But making sure that we have ways to, you know, as you described, the city council had delegated that to you, and I think it's good to really have open communication and discussion, because I think the residents here don't want to feel that they're going to be trapped, you know, trying to get to work in the morning or coming home. And they want to be able to find a way, you know, because we have limited access ways, and that's definitely in the center of town. And so as we look at building, you know, the bridges, or, you know, expanding, you know, streets, or whatever it is we're thinking of doing, you know, it's something that you're contemplating. Look far and wide into other cities, examples, ideas, thinking of what we can consider here in West Sacramento. I think we're good at being innovative, creative. Looking at opportunities for grants to do other studies is extremely important, and something we've have done a great job over the years in reaching out to, you know, access those. So those are some of the things that I see here that come into play. There's so many moving parts with this plan. So many things we need to see in place before we can make the next step. And the financing of this is pretty significant. Making sure that whatever we finance, we get in return a good investment, you know, for our money. So as we take a look at that, and we have good partners here today that, you know, we can bring together and try to make this work. Thank you. Any other comment? Right, I'll open it up for public comment at this time. I don't have anything. All right, then I'll close it up. And I'll move to our next item on the agenda, which is general administration for informal discussion. Anything from my fellow commissioners? No?
Motion to adjourn.
We're adjourned.